Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined on Meaning of Life TV. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Lauren Shields. Lauren, could you introduce yourself?
Hi there, my name is Lauren Shields. I'm the author of The Beauty Suit, How My Year of Religious Modesty Made Me a Better Feminist. And there it is.
Yeah, I'm holding it up to the camera right now. It's a people can see the cover. I like that. I like this cover a lot. They did a good job with it.
Thank you. Yeah, I was very, very excited about the cover when I saw it.
So thanks so much for coming on today. So we're going to be talking about your book, which came out this year, The Beauty Suit. So let's just start off with what is the beauty suit?
Okay, so the beauty suit is the phrase that I came up with to describe the way that women are expected to perform femininity and perform beauty. It has to do with race. Generally it's kind of white focused. It has to do with weight. You have to be under a certain weight. It has to do with youth. You have to be under a certain age. But the beauty suit is comprised of things like makeup, done hair, tight clothes, high heels. Basically, the ways that women have to put a lot of effort into our appearance, or feel like we have to put a lot of effort into our appearance just to leave the house, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, you've defined this term and refer to it through the book, but kind of the origin of the book lies in what you call the experiment, which you capitalize throughout the book. So can you explain what is the experiment and how it got started?
Yeah, so I called it the modesty experiment. And when I was in my first year of seminary, which is like grad school for theology, some people hear seminary and they go, "Oh, you're a nun." I'm not a nun. I'm also not a priest. Obviously, I'm not allowed to be a priest because I'm a woman. But anyway, I was in my first year of seminary, and I was in a class with a woman who came in to talk about Islam and the hijab, the headscarf that many Muslim women wear. And as a young white feminist, I was ready to have the discussion about how terrible Islam is and how oppressive it is to make women cover their hair, and oh, it's such a terrible thing. And instead, she came in and said, actually, it's not necessarily oppressive to cover your hair if you choose to do it. And most American Muslim women choose to cover for feminist reasons. And that really blew my mind. And so I went back to this couch that was outside my classroom after class, and I was reading about these women who chose to cover, and they were super empowered, and they did it. They covered as a way to say, my appearance is not who I am. And I kind of looked down at my own body, and I was in this skirt that pinched my waist, and I was in all this perfect makeup and awesome hair, products and everything else. And I thought, I thought that covered women were oppressed, and I judged them so harshly, but am I any less oppressed for feeling like I have to do all of this stuff just to be acceptable in public? So I designed the modesty experiment, where I covered my hair, my arms, and my legs, and I stopped wearing makeup and nail polish, and I did that for 9 months. So that's what the modesty experiment was for me.
So how was it? Just the idea popped into your head that you wanted to do? It's almost like participatory journalism, or reminds me a little bit of like Super Size Me, or people kind of doing an experiment on themselves to see what happens. How did you decide to fully not just think about this idea, but fully live it?
It was that one aha moment on the couch. It's always really nice when we have an aha moment that really pushes us. Usually aha moments are more diffuse, but mine was just, it sort of pointed out my own hypocrisy. And when I asked myself, could I not wear makeup internally? No, I freaked out. And I thought, I'm so into being liberated. I'm so into being a feminist, but I can't even face not wearing makeup for a week. What does that say? And so, I did decide to do participatory journalism because my body and my appearance are something that I had to play with and to experiment with. And it turned out to be the best way that I knew how to get out from underneath what I suddenly knew was a really oppressive standard that I was setting for myself.
Mm-hmm. So the book is an interesting combination of memoir of your life and things that happened to you before you started this experiment and during it. And and then like sociological analysis, a lot more theology than I was expecting when I read the book,
Yeah.
which was interesting because I learned a lot from that, and some anthropological kind of information. So it's a really interesting like combination of different genres. But and the first chapter is kind of like before, you know, your life before seminary and having the idea of dressing modestly. Can you talk a little bit about that time in your life and like how, looking back on it, you were living in the beauty suit?
Yeah, sure. So I talk in the first chapter a lot about the time that I spent working in New York City. I was trying to get into the film industry, and I worked on Fifth Avenue at a corporate ethics company. So basically, it was just a paying the bills kind of a job. But every day, you know, going to work on Fifth Avenue, you see women who are impeccably dressed, and they just look awesome all day, every day. And I felt like I had to do the same thing, both because I was on Fifth Avenue and because I was in a professional setting. But I remember every time I had to put on this, you know, I had to blow dry my hair and put on a suit and heels, and for some reason nobody was wearing sneakers on the subway, which I was like, wait, what happened to that? I thought we were doing sneakers until we got to the office. I guess we stopped doing that. But I always felt like I was kind of an imposter, but at the same time, sort of deep in my bones, even when I wasn't wearing the corporate suit, I staked a lot of my relevance on my ability to wear the beauty suit well. Sort of deep in my gut, I believed that people listened to me because of my age and because I fit certain weight requirements and because I wore this sort of availability costume. I'm not saying that I went around, you know, dressed in midriff shirts or anything else, but just, you know, the ability to wear the beauty suit really well is kind of a substitute for power for a lot of women, and that's not a coincidence. That is one of the ways that patriarchy sort of rears its ugly head is, you know, you can feel powerful by making people look at you, which feels like power until you can no longer make people look at you. Mm-hmm. So I didn't before I wrote the book, I spent a lot of time in cities. I grew up in Chicago. And I never left the house without makeup, ever. I very rarely left the house with my head covered. If my head was uncovered, my hair was done, meaning, you know, blown out or straightened or curled or whatever. For a while, I had a pixie cut that actually takes a lot of maintenance. So the beauty suit was a huge part of both my identity and my personal armor.
Mm-hmm. And you describe some kind of unsettling jobs that you either had very briefly or applied for.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that briefly?
Sure.
As just like part of your experience before this like other part of your life started?
Totally. So I was working in this office up until 2008 when the recession hit and I was laid off. And because I'm a very proud person, I didn't want to leave New York City. So first I applied for housekeeping jobs, then I applied for waitressing jobs. And then I started looking on Craigslist for things that would give me more money more quickly. One of the jobs that I worked was as a, quote, foot model, meaning I got paid to let men massage my feet. And they constantly pushed me. And I actually only did it one time because it felt weird for me. It doesn't feel weird for all women, but it felt weird for me because these men kept pushing me to perform sexual acts with my feet. And that was not what I was, you know, you can rub my feet, but I'm not going to rub you with my feet, if you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. What those kinds of jobs taught me was that my internal narrative was, well, this is empowerment. You're using your body to make money, which is what feminism is all about, is paying your own bills and using your sex appeal to take care of yourself. What those jobs taught me is that may be empowering for some women, but it is not empowering for me. And it slowly eroded my dignity. Again, that's not to say that sex work is bad or that it erodes everyone's dignity, but it brought me to the limit of the possibility of being sexy as my sole method of empowerment.
Mm-hmm. So then there's kind of a jump, at least tonally, and I guess in time, from you living in New York and having these type of jobs to being in seminary at Emory. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
So how did you decide to leave the life you were living in New York and pursue a very different life?
Yeah. Well, even before I was laid off from my corporate ethics job, I knew that film was not the right field for me. The reason being that in 2008, the Me Too movement did not exist. And I experienced in the film industry daily harassment. And that's a really common experience for women in film. And you have a choice. You can either sort of play along and pretend that it doesn't bother you, or you can speak up. And neither one of those choices were things that I thought were sustainable for me, because I knew that I was going to have to tolerate this for a good 10, 15 years before I was in a position where I could say, all right, dude, stop commenting on my butt. No, you cannot offer drinks with just me. We're not doing that. It was going to be a long time. And so I had always been interested in religious studies, specifically how the church in particular can produce such wonderful, loving people and such jerks at the same time. It seemed like organized religion really made some people the best versions of themselves and was used as an excuse to hurt people by others. And when I was in New York City, I reconnected with a pastor friend of mine after I had decided that film was not the right place for me. And I asked him all these questions. I was like, well, you're really educated, but you're a pastor. How can you be religious and think that science is nonsense? And he said, well, actually, not all religious people think that. And I said, well, why do you hate gay people? And he said, I don't hate gay people. So I was sort of painting everyone with the same brush, when the reality is that there's a huge spectrum of belief, even within the church. So I decided to go to seminary after doing a 9-month stint as a hospital chaplain in Tampa, which is where my family is. And I had to go back after I lost my job because I couldn't stay in New York City without doing those foot fetish jobs. Mm-hmm. And so, I did 9 months as a hospital chaplain, and it absolutely blew my mind. And I went, oh my gosh, I do not have to be bigoted or oppressed or repressed in order to be a religious person. I can be all of myself and still belong in organized religion. So that's how I decided. It's a pretty big leap. I admit it's a pretty big leap, but it did make sense, and it took me about 3 years to get there. So.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a religious childhood?
Yeah. Somewhat. I grew up in the Midwest, and the Midwest is there's a lot of the United Church of Christ is big out there. And so when I was growing up, my dad took us to church for holidays usually, but he was really into he impressed upon us that different religious paths all had something to offer. And then for a couple of years, he dated a woman who was very involved in her church. And so we spent a lot of time in, community theater and at this church and at church camps and stuff. And the level of compassion and kindness that I experienced with these folks just blew my mind. And I never forgot the kinds of people that I met there. So on the one hand, yeah, I did have sort of a religious upbringing, at least for a couple of years. It was a very progressive church. To this day, it's not affiliated with a particular denomination. But on the other hand, my parents divorced when I was 5, and my dad had custody of us during the week, and my mom had us on weekends. My dad was like, you got to remember that every path has merit. Every path has something that it has to offer you. So
that's interesting. Okay, so let's talk about kind of the first chapter where you look at one of the Abrahamic religions, and that's Islam. And so a Muslim woman who wore a hijab helped inspire the experiment. And I think when most people think of modest dress for women, they probably think of women wearing a hijab or something more elaborate than that in either the U.S. or a majority Muslim country. And then you kind of you show that there's alternate readings to some of the key verses that have inspired these understandings of what God wants Muslims to do, and and you talk about the way that women react to these strictures. Sometimes they find it
Hmm.
constraining, and sometimes they find it liberating. So, can you talk more about Islam and modest dress?
Yeah. So, a disclaimer at the beginning, I am not Muslim. All of the facts that I have come from reading Muslim scholars. Um, so what I found out during the research for this book is that the verses that are usually used, similar to Christianity, the verses that are usually used to tell women to cover up are actually they're fairly ambiguous in terms of specifics. Um, there's one verse that says something like, draw your scarves over your bosoms in order to be, or over your chest in order to be recognized as a decent woman, which eh, made me pretty uncomfortable, in terms of, because there's that equivalency between how you dress and how men treat you, which to my mind, men are responsible for their behavior, full stop, always. It doesn't matter what women are wearing. But that does appear in Islamic scriptures. But the other verses, one is reinterpreted to point to the Prophet Muhammad's privacy, his modest nature, his humility, and so in Islam, the point that I make is that these scriptures have been interpreted by the culture that surrounded them, which up until this point has always been patriarchal. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all come from highly patriarchal, androcentric cultures, and that influences how those scriptures are interpreted always. So yeah, I don't know. Without getting too much into specifics, because I'd have to have the text in front of me, and I don't right now. Um, but the scriptures are pretty open to interpretation, and at no point do they say women cover your hair, women wear a burqa, women make sure that the curves of your body are completely invisible to men. And what's really interesting, what I found in my research for this book, is that across the world, no matter what women are wearing, women are always blamed for bad behavior by men. She showed me her ankle, that's why I raped her. She showed me her tummy, that's why I raped her. She was walking funny, that's why I pulled her skirt off. And it's the same all over the world, which means it's not about the clothes. It's not about what we're wearing. So, sorry, I went off on a tangent a little bit there, but I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, and you point out, when you kind of do a survey of other countries and other
Mm-hmm.
cultures, that women in India, if they're wearing traditional dress, often have their midriff exposed,
Yeah,
which in America would be kind of shocking,
it
but
would.
there is considered normal. But then I guess like showing your legs, a woman showing her legs is considered offensive in
Exactly.
traditional
Very
culture in
offensive.
India.
Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on why um, Islam is, so you point out that there's, in the three Abrahamic faiths, all of them have some kind of idea that women should like be modest and cover themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on why Islam is the religion where this has persisted among like regular people most strongly, as opposed to just like people like nuns or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Well, so modesty has persisted in all three Abrahamic traditions. There are, well, you know this, you read the book. There are Jewish women who adhere to tzniut, which is Jewish modesty. I was inspired by women who adhered to that in New York City. I would see them walking around in Brooklyn, and they looked super cute, but they were covered. Um, Same thing with Christianity. There are the Church of Latter-day Saints is big on female modesty.
Mm-hmm.
The Amish obviously are very big on female modesty. So I don't know if it's fair to say that Islam is the only one where modesty has persisted.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So why don't we talk about Christianity?
Hmm.
So you talk about both kind of the traditional, like the traditional clothing that a religious woman would wear, a nun or a prioress or something,
Uh-huh.
and
Yeah.
then also the kind of the subcultures that continue to have modesty as part of their dress, like the Amish.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and you point out the biblical verses that are involved in this. One I was not familiar with at all that says that women shouldn't braid their hair.
Yeah.
I never even heard that before.
I
I'm
know.
Jewish
That's
myself,
specific.
so my New Testament knowledge is weak. But yeah, so how does the Christian version of this play out?
Yeah. So the Christian version, first of all, it's worth saying that Jesus almost never talked about sex. He talked about money a lot, but he never said, women cover your bosoms, women cover your hair. What he said was, men, if you look at a woman with lust in your eye, pluck out your eye. And for some reason, that's never quoted. Uh, I wonder why. Um,
Rarely enforced or performed, I would assume.
yes, yeah. Um, but Paul, the disciple Paul, who apostle. He was not a disciple, he was apostle. He was the one who wrote about not braiding your hair, not women not adorning themselves. He also wrote the verse, and I think it's Corinthians, about women should cover their head when they prophesy. Meaning women should cover their head when they pray. A lot of Catholic women still do this. It's practiced in Italy quite a bit. But in the Christian tradition so far, it's been interpreted disproportionately against women to cover yourselves, basically so that men don't think about sex when they look at you. But the way I reinterpret it, and the way it's really easy to reinterpret it as, is don't engage in conspicuous consumption. Don't wear a bunch of gold and silver. Don't spend a ton of time doing your hair. Don't be conspicuously wealthy, because that's not what God wants from you, and that's not what followers of Jesus do. That said, Paul, so that's another way to interpret the modesty guidelines, and that would apply to both men and women. But for me, the argument is kind of weird, because Paul himself had a very strong conversion experience, but the dude never met Jesus. He's not Jesus. He's a guy who is following Jesus as closely and as ardently as he possibly can. He was a guy who wrote a lot, but he's a man in his cultural situation, in which he's writing from his cultural limitations, as was Jesus also. But I don't know. I sort of forgot where I was going with answering your question. Is there anything?
No, I mean, I've heard, there's a understanding that, Jesus preached, and then his disciples handed down his wisdom that was eventually written down, and then decades later, Paul kind of codified it into a religion that one could live in the way that the Jewish sages codified the rules of
Exactly.
the rules for everyday life.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about the Amish, which you explore their lifestyle. And I guess what's striking about them is that they everyone knows they reject the modern world in most ways, and most modern technology, and they don't have zippers on their clothing, I think, at least, and so things like this.
Yeah.
So it's different from the way traditional Muslim would observe their the rules of their faith, where usually they'll accept modernity instead of reject it, and kind of the the women in America who dress or are Christian and dress very, very traditionally and cover their heads also have this whole other withdrawal from contemporary society in most ways. I've seen Amish girls playing volleyball at a kind of community event I went to once. But so they don't reject everything, but mostly they're withdrawing from modern society. So do you see any difference there with people who have this just radically different lifestyle?
Any difference?
Versus like a American Muslim who dresses one way but engages in all the other things that a American
Oh,
Christian would.
yeah, yeah. A modestly dressed Muslim, let's say an American Muslim woman who wears the hijab, she doesn't, like you said, she doesn't disengage from popular culture. That's not, or she might a little bit, but that's not one of her reasons for dressing differently than mainstream America. She covers her hair. A lot of them cover their hair again for feminist reasons, but also because they want to be visibly Muslim. They want to be recognized as faithful women. For Amish folks, their big sort of edict is anything that comes from the outside world, anything that comes from non-Amish culture is to be viewed with suspicion. So they take every single thing from the surrounding culture and examine whether or not they want to accept it. That means that, I didn't know this, that it's not that Amish people dress in what they wore in the 1700s. They dress in partially what they wore in the 1700s, but also what they wore in the 1800s and the 1900s. They take individual elements of dress and adopt them or not based on what their particular community feels, whether they feel that item of dress aligns with their beliefs. And different Amish communities, if you've seen them in events, you know that different Amish communities all dress differently from the mainstream, but they all dress differently from each other as well. Some of them will wear those transparent bonnets. Others think you should absolutely not wear those. So I think that the difference between a covered Muslim and an Amish person is that a covered Muslim strives to move within the mainstream culture while covered, whereas an Amish person is like, I have no interest in mainstream culture whatsoever.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about Orthodox Judaism, which is the Abrahamic faith that I'm most familiar with of the three.
Yeah.
So and you combine the chapter with this with talking about technology as well, which is interesting. Maybe we can talk about that also. So I have some of my first cousins who live in Israel were raised secular, but became ultra Orthodox, and one of them in particular probably dresses today very, very similar to the way you dressed in the modesty experiment, of long skirts and sleeves to the wrist and like a head wrap, covering her hair.
Yeah.
And I don't know what are your thoughts on the place of dress in among very religious Jewish women?
I don't think I can comment on the whether or not they should be dressing that way. Is that what you're asking?
No, just like how does it? I mean, what differences do you see in some of the other faiths that you cover, or how do you think it's unique in one way? I mean, one thing that is different is that some ultra Orthodox women wear wigs instead of a traditional head covering, and the wig might be like a very close approximation of what their actual hair looks like. So it's a weird. It's stranger than just wearing a head wrap.
Yeah, it's amazing how often people comment about that, because it's like, okay, well, if you're covering your hair because your hair is erva, meaning it's an erotic stimulus, but then you're putting a different erva on top of your head, how is that really modest? That discussion is different in every community. There are many modest Jewish women, especially in New York City, who say, well, I wear a wig, but if you wear a really crappy wig, then that's not looking your best, which is actually also part of modest dress. Is you're supposed to, for Jewish women, you're supposed to dress in a way that lets your inner light shine. So the object is not to look unattractive or frumpy. The object is to look polished, but with a very strong boundary between yourself and the outside world. There's a big emphasis on privacy among modest Jewish women, which is why I tie it to technology. It seems like the point of social media is to blast away all the barriers between oneself and literally everyone else. So it's the wig thing is it differs from community to community. Some women have really really nice wigs, and they are talked about by their own communities because their wigs are too nice. So it's just yeah, it's very very complicated. But the reason that they wear a wig and not a headscarf is that their interpretation is that their actual hair is what is really arousing for men, and that should only be reserved for their husbands. Jewish women who observe tzniut generally cover only after marriage. So you can tell a married woman because her hair is covered, and an unmarried woman because her hair is uncovered. And again, that has to do with only my husband gets to see my head, only my husband gets to see my hair. So it's very interesting, and in keeping with the oldest Abrahamic tradition, it is also the most variably interpreted because I've had 8,000 years to to engage with it, as opposed to 2,000 for Christians or 1,500 for Muslims.
Yeah, my kind of lay Jewish person understanding, and I was raised in conservative Judaism, which is kind of like the middle ground in America between Reform and Orthodox, was that like Judaism is like a lot of rules, but then the rabbis also have figured out like the exception to the rule. So like there's a rule there's all these rules. I think there's like 36 maybe of things you're not supposed to do on the Sabbath. But then there are all these exceptions, and then people figured out that it'd be okay if you pay a non-Jewish person to do some of this stuff for you on the weekends. That's called a Sabbath goy. I don't know if it really exists anymore, but it existed at one point. And so then so people were like, okay, we can't display our hair to men in public, but wait, if we put this other thing on, it's not really our hair. So it's like a legal, like Judaism has like a long legalistic tradition. So I kind of see it as here's the loophole, and we'll like go on living our lives, through the loophole.
Yeah, I have a Jewish friend who likes to tell me that if you ask 5 rabbis for an opinion, you get 6 opinions.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about technology and social media and how that has changed, really just in like the last 10 years or so, because so many of these things are new, how that has changed how women are pressured to present themselves.
Yeah. So before social media, women self-objectified as a method of empowerment, meaning they wore the beauty suit as a way to feel visible. It encourages women to think of ourselves as objects. With the advent of social media and the internet in general, we are encouraged to see ourselves, men and women, but especially women, because the phenomenon already existed when social media showed up. We're even more encouraged to see ourselves almost as brands. We can take pictures of ourselves that are very curated. We can make sure that, like the way that you look at yourself in the mirror, where you kind of suck in your tummy and there's a certain angle, and you're like, yeah, I look good. Now you can do that in front of everybody, and you're expected to. There are filters where you can make your skin clearer or make it look like you're wearing makeup. And so seeing yourself on a screen naturally makes you see yourself as a thing. And the better you are on social media at seeing yourself as a thing, both with photography and with whatever you say online, the more sort of social currency you have. So social media has kind of punched the gas on this idea that that as a woman, your worth lies in your objecthood to other people. So. Yeah,
and there's some positive effects from social media, but it's starting to seem like more the negative outweighs the positive.
Isn't it? It was fun, and now it's kind of a nightmare.
So we won't talk about the president, but just like so there's all these apps that let you manipulate, like in a Photoshop like way, but very simply manipulate a selfie that you just took. And there was an article in the New Yorker within the last year or so about how these are really really popular in China, especially, and it's just like. You just like don't post a selfie that hasn't been like highly edited by one of these apps that can change how your face looks and make it, conform to the beauty stereotypes of Chinese culture. And then there's also just like always, it's like you're always on, you're always like expected to be doing something, and
Right.
there are people who, well, we all have friends who are like, everything they do, they post to Facebook. Every event they go to, they post, and then
Yes.
other people get tagged in it, and you feel pressure to be like,
Yes.
to
And
be
you're like,
like,
I don't want to participate. Oh.
yeah, to be
Yeah.
memorialized for posterity. Um,
Yeah.
and it,
And
it it seems like this is much harsher on women than men.
it is. I would say. I mean, I have never been a man, so I don't know, but it kind of is. And you start to see your own life as a product for consumption. You'll be out in the park walking and be like, I should Instagram this. Should you? Or can you just like enjoy the moment? But it's really hard to resist that urge, because when other people like our photos and when other people pay attention to us, we get a dopamine hit.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it feels good to have attention. And it's really hard to control that desire to want to be seen as beautiful, not only by the people who know us, but by total strangers.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun, but it's soul sucking really quickly, and it demolishes our self concept as someone who exists when people are not looking at us.
Mm-hmm. So related to like the selfie is something I've been wondering about for a while, but haven't expressed for fear that someone would say I'm offending people. But I'll just say it here now. So it seems like the makeup trends of the past couple of years
Mm-hmm.
are kind of like made for the selfie and not the real world. And there's been like this explosion of and like Kim Kardashian, who you talk about in the book, has led it in some ways, explosion of like beauty bloggers and YouTube people who only who do makeup, and so, some of these are young men in addition to young women,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, so it's like, and sometimes I see these things like retweeted onto my timeline of like these like rainbow like eyeshadow concoctions that must have taken like hours and hours, and like no one would have done this just for like themselves and walking around that day. Like you would only like put so much effort into your eyeshadow if you were going to take a photo of it and then post it to Instagram and hope it went viral or whatever. So yeah, it just seems like, I don't know if this probably is not an original thought, but like the social media and selfies have like created this environment in which like a really exaggerated makeup on women mostly is become really popular. But then when I see someone out in the world who has like this really exaggerated makeup on, it's kind of like, it's too much. Maybe it would look good on Instagram, but not in real life. And it's like, we're living more in social media than in the real world.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I don't think that's offensive. I've noticed something like that too. Now, I should say before I talk about that before I did the modesty experiment, and even today, when I'm having a crappy day, getting really made up kind of gives me a boost.
Mm-hmm.
Being able to look in the mirror and be like, yeah, all right, okay, I can wear the suit. All right, I'm good. But at the same time, like, I've noticed it too, where contouring is a thing. Which looks really nice when you take a picture. But the many times that I have attempted to learn how to contour, as soon as I leave the house and I see myself in the sunlight, I'm like, whoa, I'm wearing a lot of makeup.
So
And
can you define contouring? Because I don't think I even totally understand it, and probably some of our viewers and listeners don't understand it either.
Okay, that's so funny, because contouring is a really, now it's a really basic thing in makeup, but it's funny to me that a lot of people don't even know what it is. So contouring is, you take a shade of brown, generally, that is a little bit darker than your skin tone, and you put it in you put it underneath your cheekbones, you put it at your temples. Basically, contouring is, and then there are lighter colors or highlights that you put on top of your cheekbones, on your nose, on your brow bones, on your chin. So contouring is a way to make your face look more defined by painting it more, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And the object is to blend it so that it looks fairly natural on Instagram. But again, Kim Kardashian and the whole Kardashian empire have led this charge. There are now contour palettes with 3 or 4 different colors, where you use this color here and this color here and this color here and this color here, and it's supposed to be a subtle way of enhancing your features. But it's a ton of makeup. It is a ton of makeup. And that really plays well into this the idea of female beauty is empowerment and its connection to capitalism. There's a reason that makeup companies and hair companies and shoe companies have tapped into feminist rhetoric in order to sell us empowerment. I mean, all of this new makeup that we're supposed to be wearing, false eyelashes that we wear every day, contoured brows. Like, I don't know if you've noticed, but like eyebrows have become a really, they're a thing.
Right.
Even 5-6 years ago, they were not a thing. Who benefits? Cosmetics companies. They make a ton of money, a ton of money. The more stuff they can sell us, the happier they are. So selfie culture it's not an accident that it's really blossomed. It has to do with feeling looked at and feeling good, but man, if it doesn't feed the machine, the amount of products that women are expected to have on our faces is astronomical at this point.
Yeah, you don't have to be like a Marxist to see that the makeup company wants you to buy 4 colors instead of 1 color because they get to sell you 4 things. You need a
$98 color palette. Do you?
Yeah. I wonder.
You want to be rough? Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if I mean, it seems like this, when people make movies about our era, if they are still doing such things 50 years from now, this kind of extreme makeup is going to be like the signifier that like big hair is for if you're setting a movie in the 80s or something.
Oh, yeah. Gosh, maybe. And what's interesting, too, is that supposedly a lot of men can't tell the difference between a natural face and makeup that is contrived to look natural. But women know it when we see it immediately. She's got contour, she's got nude eyeshadow, she's got lip plumper, she's got blah, 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 blah. But it's really interesting that the natural look is actually one of the most expensive and time-consuming suits that you can wear. So...
Yeah, there was an Amy Schumer skit about this from a couple of years ago. Do you remember that one with the boy band singing about how she's so beautiful she doesn't need makeup? And they're like, "Oh, that's what you look like without makeup." No, put some more on. Thank you.
Yeah. I remember that, and I remember feeling so validated when I saw that. I was like, "Oh, it's not just me." Okay, all right, great. Yeah.
So a related question I have is about skincare. Which seems to have kind of blossomed just in the past couple years as like a new thing that women can do in like a very focused and intense way, and that men are like, I guess probably the skincare companies would like men to start buying this stuff as well, but it's really like a female focused thing now. I see, and then there's been somewhat of a backlash to it. There was an article in the outline that we'll link to that came out like 6 months ago that was making the anti-skincare case, saying like, humans existed for hundreds of thousands of years without putting these chemicals on our faces, and we were more or less fine. And then there was a backlash for the backlash of women saying like, no, like I feel like this really helps me in my life. And okay, so do you have any thoughts on the skincare trend?
Yeah, I mean, I would have to do more research to know if skincare really is more of a trend now than it used to be. I know that I am very familiar with the sense of panic that I have around aging, skin dullness. Somebody told me recently that I have redness around here, and it just blew my mind. I was like, I have to fix it. But I don't, though. I mean, like you said, humans have been procreating for millennia without perfect skin, and without contour. I think the reason that skincare is so easy to push on women and not men is, again, women are told again and again and again and again and again that our relevance is based on the way that we look. If we do not look a certain way, then we will not be listened to. That looking a certain way is a prerequisite for being seen. That has to do with aging. I know, excuse me, a lot of my female friends who are over 50, and you can look this up on the internet too, they say that once you pass a certain age, people stop seeing you. It's like you don't exist as a woman. That is terrifying. That means the last half of my life, no one is going to see me. So, or at least I'm going to feel like nobody sees me. So it's very easy to sell me skincare products that promise me that that's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think it works really well on women because, with any social movement, there's always a backlash. And as women are getting more empowered, the backlash is subtle, but it's there, which is Yeah, okay, you're empowered, but are you hot? Nobody cares if you're empowered if you're fat, for example.
Hmm.
Ask Roxanne Gay about that one. So,
So that reminds me of being seen and not being seen. You talk a little bit about that aspect of when you were doing the experiment of how people would treat you or
see
ignore
me.
you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's really interesting. So initially I was like, oh my God, all my fears have been confirmed. I am secretly ugly, and the beauty suit is the only reason that I have any worth. But then as I got more comfortable and as I observed more, what I noticed was that a certain kind of person did not see me. The kind of people that always saw me before, which was sort of young, white, middle class bros, they didn't see me. Men of color saw me. They complimented me on my headscarf all the time, whereas white guys were like, I don't know what's going on in your head, so I'm just not going to look at you. They really don't know what to do with me. Now the theory that I have is that the beauty suit is a kind of signifier that you're participating in popular culture. You're saying, yes, I am spending time wearing what the dominant culture tells me I'm supposed to wear, so I want people who benefit from the dominant culture to pay attention to me. So it's more of a cultural signifier and an availability costume than it is a reflection of actual attractiveness. But yeah, the guys who usually saw me before didn't see me anymore because I wasn't wearing the availability costume anymore.
Hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, do you have any thoughts on your book and cultural appropriation regarding fashion? Like I think you mentioned it a little bit. You talk about getting dreadlocks at one
I
or
did have dreads.
after you end the experiment, and then feeling something, feeling something about that. A lot of the cultural appropriation arguments center on dress, and usually for women, there was this social media blow up. I don't know if you caught this one from a couple months ago of a teenage girl somewhere in the middle of America who wore a traditional Chinese jipao, if I'm saying that word correctly, to her
Yeah,
prom,
the red dress, right?
and
Yeah.
posted photos
Hmm.
of it, and then she got like savaged from hundreds of people who were like, "Cultural appropriator, how dare you?" When this is just some innocent girl
Yeah,
wearing a dress, like has
just some
committed
kid.
committed no real offense. But then
Yeah,
you in a way you were wearing outfits that were not like part of your culture, really. Like,
not part of mainstream culture. Yeah.
yeah. So,
Yeah.
do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when I was first designing the experiment, the first thing that popped into mind when I looked at modest fashion was like Indian women and Muslim women who dress modestly overseas, and they look stunning. They've got like the beaded shalwar kameez, and they just look great. But for me to wear Indian clothing or Middle Eastern clothing as part of my modesty experiment would be cultural appropriation, and it would be me putting on the costume of another culture. So it would be me being visible for a different reason. And also, like, how offensive would it be for a white girl to walk around talking about, oh, I'm resisting being judged for my appearance, wearing something that makes her stick out? That's kind of offensive. Um, so when I designed the experiment, rather than wearing a hijab, rather than wearing a wig, rather than going after one particular or using the modesty traditions of one particular religious tradition, I asked myself, okay, well, what are the elements of my beauty suit that I'm so unwilling to let go of? And they were my hairstyle, my makeup, and my ability to wear tight clothes. So in an effort to avoid cultural appropriation, I made up my own rules and I borrowed from all three traditions. That said, cultural appropriation is really it's interesting because on the one hand, when you have the backlash, like for that girl was she Midwestern? Did you see she was in the Midwest? She's
Yeah, it
like in
was
Middle America somewhere.
yeah. She was like in Ohio or something, you know.
Yeah, right. So in that case, it's fun to jump on people for cultural appropriation because it makes us feel safer. It makes us feel like, well, I'm not doing cultural appropriation, but you are, and you should shut up and go away. But there's also an element of misogyny there. I can't remember the last time a man got accused of cultural appropriation. It's almost always around beauty practices. That said, appropriators usually tend to be white, and they are usually appropriating Black culture. Kylie Jenner, again, and I hate to lean on the Kardashians so much, but there's so much to investigate there. The whole big butt phenomenon. It's not cool when Black girls have big butts, but when white girls have big butts, then suddenly it's hot. And it's changed the way women go to the gym. It's changed the body ideal. Whereas when dark-skinned women have been looking like that for, the 400 years since we dragged them over here, they were fat. But if you're white, you're not fat. You're curvy. You're thick. Mm-hmm. So as a white person, it feels fun and edgy to engage in cultural appropriation. But we really, really, really need to stay in our own lane as much as we possibly can. Because when I was wearing dreads as a white girl, nobody asked me to touch my hair, which was really interesting. Mm-hmm. People asked to touch my husband's hair all the time. I was at a wedding in Ireland a couple months ago, and I turned around and some white woman had her hands in his hair.
Oh my God.
I was like, what are you doing? Nobody ever touched me as a white girl with dreads. Mm-hmm. So, which tells you that it is racial in nature, obviously. So I think that white folks need to be really careful about is this working for me? Do I look edgy because I'm appropriating Black folks' culture? And I have the choice to put it down. And if a person of color says you are appropriating Black culture, put it down. Don't do it. Don't fight with them. Don't say, well, I'm not really appropriating. Just stop. Mm-hmm. White folks don't need dreads. We don't need to appropriate. It's a fun thing for us to do. So putting it down doesn't cost us that much. So we generally need a lot of, unfortunately, we need a lot of correction around it, but it's also our responsibility to know and be honest with ourselves. Okay, am I appropriating? Yes. I need to stop, like right now.
Mm-hmm. So I had a previous conversation with a fashion journalist whose name is unfortunately escaping me right now, who wrote an article. She writes for Refinery 29, and she wrote an article about how she was in the cultural appropriation call-out game for a decade and then got sick of it, basically. So yeah. I'll link to that conversation below.
Yeah, that'd be great.
It's mainly about fashion. Okay, so here's another question. So I'm holding the back of the book up right now. Mm-hmm. And so this contains the things that one usually might expect, a summary of the book and some quotes from other people lauding the book and the, this barcode. But it does not contain an author photo. And, and this book is all about your appearance and women's appearance. Was this intentional? Yes. Did you consider putting an author photo on?
To be honest, my publisher never gave me the option.
Really?
Yes, which to me tells me that they understand what I'm trying to do. There is an author photo. You can look me up on Google. I have an official author photo, and it's super cute, and it's in black and white, and I've got that. And I'm looking up, as you're supposed to be doing. But yeah, my publisher didn't ask me, do you want a photo on the cover? And I was like, great. No.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's like, there's something totally weird about author photos because truly, when you're reading a book, the physical appearance of the author matters very, very little. Maybe in some small cases.
In theory.
If it's a novel, I can't see how it could possibly matter what the author looks like. And yet, it's usually there. You turn over a book and you look at it, and then somehow
you do. You want to know what this person looks like. Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, I know. Maybe someone has written like a dissertation on this and trying to figure out exactly why we want to know what the person looks like who wrote this book. I don't understand it. Okay, so at the end of the book, you give some advice to women, but I was wondering if you had any advice for men about how to, if a man wanted to think more critically about these ideas. What would you advise him to do?
Yeah, for men, I would ask that you notice how often you are fed images of strong women as being sexy, Notice how often that is exploited for money to get you to buy things. And I know that our culture tells you that you are within your rights to publicly shame us if we weigh too much, if we're wearing too much makeup, if we're wearing not enough makeup, if our hair color doesn't look natural. I would ask you to just shut up. I'm sorry. It's just it hurts us. It is damaging to not only to the woman that you direct it to, but for every woman who hears it and sees it. And it's not crucial to your existence that you vocalize your judgments of us. Y'all got lots of cool stuff to do. You don't need to be saying that stuff. You do. Mm-hmm. We all do, but y'all have better ways to spend your time. Just resist the urge to publicly shame a woman, or even, just to publicly shame a woman based on her appearance. And remember that you're being manipulated into doing that. You're being encouraged to grade us, based on how we look. And that just has to do with getting you to buy more stuff and getting you to feel powerful so that you spend money. Mm-hmm. So.
I wonder, we're obviously in a cultural change right now that we'll have to see whether it's like a major cultural change or a minor one related to Me Too and sexual harassment and sexual assault and men and women in the workplace and stuff like that. So this seems like it could be part of it. Of just,
I think so.
Yeah, men trying to judge women less on their appearance is certainly not screaming at them on the street about the way they look.
Yes, please don't.
There was one question that I probably should have been in the middle of this, my discussion, but I want to ask you. So you first published an article about this in Salon a few years ago, just about the experiment that you did in modesty. What was the reaction to that article like?
Oh, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. I was expecting 2 or 3 people to say, so I summarized the modesty experiment. That's all I did. I was expecting 2 or 3 people to say, "Good for you! You've worked on a personal issue of yours." And instead, what I got was Jezebel ripping me apart. This experiment misses the point. She's still objectifying herself. I got hate mail from men and women, basically making fun of me for using my appearance to free myself from my attachment to my appearance. To which I was like, I don't know. All I have is me to experiment with. That's all I've got. I can't make other people. And it was just, and I got interview requests from Good Morning America, from the Today Show. It created this huge firestorm, which not only was I not prepared for, but I didn't want. But it took me a good 2 years to kind of emotionally recover from being hated by hundreds of strangers suddenly for saying that I did something different with my life. But when I sort of recovered, I realized that all of that vitriol and all of that backlash and all of that interest really proved my point about the power of the beauty suit. If women are so liberated, if we really can wear whatever we want, no one should have cared about what I did. Nobody should have cared. And instead, feminists in particular gave me a gigantic, cultural slap across the face. You are not allowed to do this. Which told me, okay, so the beauty suit is just as oppressive as forcing women to cover. It's just as oppressive because I am being culturally punished by my peers for speaking out against the beauty suit. Mm-hmm. So, yes, that's what it was like for me. It was kind of traumatic.
Yeah, wow. But I mean, that must have fueled both the interest of a publisher and your interest in, turning this into a full book.
It did. It's also why it took me so freaking long to write it. Because I was afraid of the backlash. I'm a very sensitive person. I'm an academic, and I'm a pastor, and I'm very, very sensitive. So it was very hard. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, when publisher, when the article came out, people were approaching me going, "Are you writing a book about this?" And I was like, "Uh-huh, yep, I sure am." Yeah, what do you want me to, like, what do I need to do to get this published? So, which is not to say that I did the experiment to write a book. I wrote a book because I thought that this stuff needed to be said. And the backlash, like you said, it bolstered my idea that, okay, this apparently does really need to be said. This does apparently need to be talked about. So, yeah.
So you are a pastor now. How do you approach the beauty suit dilemma in that role?
How do I approach what dilemma? I'm sorry, you broke up for a second.
The dilemma that women face, the beauty suit dilemma.
Oh, so I am currently I'm between churches, but there is no pastoral job that I go into without saying, I wrote a book about feminism and the beauty suit, and I'm a capital F feminist, so you need to be ready for that. I'm going to talk about it from the pulpit. I am not going to tolerate baby boomer congregants saying things like, well, you sure are more fun to watch preach than most of the other pastors I've ever seen. I've heard that so many times I can't even tell you. So I approach, there are a lot of women clergy in progressive churches. There are a lot of women clergy. More than half of seminary graduates are women. So there's not pushback against my being a leader in the church that I've heard. Maybe evangelicals don't like it, but I've never led an evangelical church, so I don't hear it. The pushback that I experience is more subtle sexism. People being talked over in meetings. I have pastor friends whose congregants tell them to wear more or less makeup. The next time I take on a church, it makes me sound like I'm out there wrestling people. Next time I accept a pastoral position, I am going to start off by I'm going to speak to the entire congregation and say, okay, here are some of the things that I have heard as a female pastor. Wear more makeup. I like the way you look when you wear. Your skirt is too short. What does your husband think? These are the things that I have heard from congregants. These are sexist things for me to hear. If you say them to me, I will very kindly but very immediately call you out. And please don't take it personally, but this is just what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. So that's how I approach it and how I plan on approaching it in the future. Fragility is something that is very often weaponized against me as a female pastor. Not my fragility, other people's fragility. They don't like it when I don't pay attention to them. They don't like it when I don't want to talk about my husband with them. So I handle it as best I can, and I'm very upfront about the fact that I will not and do not take any BS just because I'm a woman in a position of leadership. Mm-hmm. Which isn't to say it doesn't come towards me. It comes at me all the time. It's probably never going to stop in my lifetime, but I will continue to call it out.
Mm-hmm. We've gone slightly over an hour. Maybe we should wrap it up. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we end?
No, I don't think so. I think that was I said all of the things.
Okay, cool. So here again is the book cover, The Beauty Suit, How My Year of Religious Modesty Made Me a Better Feminist. Lauren Shields, thank you so much for coming on. A link to the book will be below. I assume you're on Twitter somewhere?
I am at _modesty_exp.
Okay, interesting. And a link to your Twitter will be below, and anything else mentioned in this episode. So, Lauren, thank you for coming on. Thank you to all our listeners and viewers out there, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you, Aryeh.